Okay, so how about all those various little structures we have in the skin, and what are they doing there? You may not have realized there was so much going on your skin before you wound up taking anatomy and physiology, but the skin is a pretty interesting and active body system for us. Alright, so some of the major structures in the skin, there are several of them. 4 types, though, are actually outgrowths from the epidermis. That means that the source of the cells that make up these structures, they actually come from the epidermis. So there are cells in the epidermis that can divide and change and create these particular skin structures, believe it or not, which is that's a good thing, because let's say you have an injury of some type and some of these structures get damaged or destroyed. As long as you have nearby epidermis that has survived, a burn or an injury, you will have cells in the epidermis that can divide and migrate down into the dermis and recreate these structures for you. So these things, in some cases, can be replaced when you're injured or burned. So that includes your sweat glands, the oil-producing glands. Those actually are outgrowths of the epidermis. Your hair and hair follicles, and then also your fingernails and toenails. Alright, so let's talk a little bit about sweat glands. There are 2 main types of sweat glands. Another term for sweat gland is sudoriferous glands. And I know on the Mastering A&P homework, don't forget that sweat glands equal sudoriferous glands, because sudoriferous is used quite a bit on those review exercises. Okay, so you have a couple of different types of sweat glands in the skin. The most abundant ones are called eccrine or merocrine sweat glands. Eccrine sweat gland is the term you hear the most. Those are particularly abundant. You got tons of them on the palms of your hand. You guys know that your palms can get sweaty, and the soles of your feet can get sweaty, and your forehead can get very sweaty. So if you were checking out skin tissues under the microscope and you wanted to take a look at eccrine sweat glands, it would be great if you had some skin coming from those areas, because they would be very abundant there. Let me skip over here. Let's look at our skin chunk for a second. And so on our generic skin chunk diagram, right in here, that little structure you see right there is an eccrine sweat gland, or an eccrine sudoriferous gland. That little tube that's extending away from the gland is called the duct. That's the duct of the eccrine sweat gland. So that's what's going to bring the sweat up to the surface and deposit it up there on the surface of the skin. That little bundled mass down in there is the actual gland itself. This picture over here, they're showing you, now think about if you had a bundled mass of tubes, that's what an eccrine sweat gland looks like, and then you sliced through that, you made a 2-dimensional slice through that, what would you see if you were just looking at that 2-dimensional slice end on? In cross section, you would see a series of rings like this. So if you were looking at an eccrine sweat gland under the microscope, this is what you would see. You're looking in 2 dimensions, but that's actually a representation of this tube-like structure that's wiggling and winding all over the place in 3 dimensions. Okay, let me back up over here. Function. So those the cells. Cells are the things in your body that make things. So the cells down in the eccrine sweat glands make sweat, and sweat consists of course, 99% of it is water, but it also has good old sodium chloride in it, salt. Vitamin C, believe it or not, is in there. Antibodies, those are weapons that help you fight infections. You'll learn about those next semester. Dermacidins are also, derm refers to the skin, and side, to kill. These are killer, they're actually proteins that kill bacteria, and so your sweat will contain those. And then you also have various metabolic wastes in there as well. So you do get rid of some of the waste from your body through your sweat also. These eccrine sweat glands are very important for temperature regulation. If you remember that from when we were discussing homeostasis during Unit 1, remember that when your body needs to cool itself, the hypothalamus, which is the control center in the brain which controls the body temperature, sends signals to your eccrine sweat glands, hey, start squirting out more sweat onto the surface of the skin, and then as that sweat evaporates, that helps you dissipate body heat. It helps your body cool down. So that's a major function of those. Now, since sweat contains lots and lots and lots of water, that's also why you dehydrate. The more you sweat, that water is coming from your body fluids. Those cells are taking in that water and creating sweat from it and releasing it there onto the skin surface. Okay, you have another type of sweat gland called apocrine sweat glands, and those are more restricted in terms of their locations. They also look different, and we'll see that when we go over the anatomy material for Unit 2. So apocrine sweat glands, you mainly have those in your axillary region. Remember that, that's armpit and anogenital areas. So around the anus and the genitals. So these do produce sweat, but it tends to be a thicker type of fluid. It has more fats in it and some additional proteins in it. And the ducts to these glands that actually carry this sweat toward the surface, they dump into hair follicles in those areas. So then the sweat gets into the hair follicle, and then it travels through the hair follicle up to the surface of the skin. These types of glands are actually, these are the ones that cause body odor, armpit odor. One of the reasons why you have that odor in these parts of the body is because of the type of sweat that is produced by these glands. These glands don't actually become active until you achieve puberty. Now, you may have heard before it's the bacteria that live in your armpits that cause armpit odor, and yes, that is true, but it's also the substances you have in the type of sweat produced by these glands that contribute to that odor as well. There are some modified apocrine glands, so which means that they're technically apocrine glands that have taken on different functions in different parts of the body. So actually in your ears, the external ear canal, you have ceruminous glands, which produce or secrete cerumen, that's earwax. So your earwax producing glands are actually apocrine sweat glands, but they don't produce sweat, they produce earwax instead. And the mammary glands, believe it or not, in the female breasts, which produce breast milk, they're actually modified apocrine sweat glands. They don't produce sweat, they produce milk for nursing infants instead. So that's kind of interesting that those structures come from those types of sweat glands. Okay, sebaceous glands are the glands that produce skin oil or sebum. That is the name for skin oil. And they're widely distributed. They're all over the surface of your skin. Most of them empty into hair follicles, and they become active when you reach puberty. So they make your skin oil. Your skin oil has a low pH. It's an oil, it's a lipid, so it has a lot of fatty acids in it that helps lower the pH at the surface of your skin, which is, that's a good thing because what it does is it helps control the growth of bacteria on the skin. Bactericidal means it kills bacteria. And no, your skin oil doesn't kill all the bacteria on your skin. You have plenty of bacteria on your skin, believe me, but it helps control the amount of bacteria that you have in those locations. Also gives your hair and your skin a softer consistency. Also helps out with some of the waterproofing at the surface of the skin as well. These glands become active when you reach puberty. Alright, so this, the anatomy of this, of course, will be covered on the anatomy section for the unit, but on our little skin chunk diagram here, So right in there, this little thing that looks like a clover leaf there, that is a sebaceous gland. There's one over here they're showing you a portion of, and you can see how it's connected to. Here's a hair follicle with a hair sticking up, and then here's one over here as well with the hair sticking up. So there's your sebaceous gland. There's one over here. So you can see how they're connected to the hair follicle itself. So as the cells in that gland make the skin oil, they squirt it into the hair follicle, and then travels through the hair follicle along the hair shaft up to the surface of the skin. If you looked at one of these under the microscope in a two-dimensional slice through the dermis there, you would see this is a hair shaft. This is a hair follicle, I'm sorry, over here, with the hair actually there in the center, headed that way. And over here on the side, this is actually what a sebaceous gland would look like. So the cells in there almost look like little fried eggs, because they're actually squamous in shape. They're flat, and imagine if you're looking down on flat cells from the top, they would kind of look like a bunch of fried eggs together. But those are the cells in there that make your sebum or skin oil. Alright, I'm actually going to stop that video lecture there, and I'll finish up the accessory structures of the skin on the next video.